I'm Michael McMullan. Welcome once again to the WPBSA official podcast, where in this episode, we're looking back on an event which really was groundbreaking. It's an overused term nowadays, but it's certainly apt when talking about the 1994 Women's World Championship, because for the first time, it went all the way to the country where snooker was born, India. And I'm delighted to be joined in our first transatlantic episode by the 7 times women's world champion all the way from North Carolina, Allison Fisher. Allison, wonderful to talk to you. Just tell me, if you would, what's your initial thought when someone says 1994 World Championship?
I'll tell you what my initial thought is. 30 years ago, and I can't believe it. Yeah, but I do remember the tournament that you're talking about, and in Delhi. And it was, I remember playing in a really nice hotel. It was a fabulous hotel. I don't know which one it was, but I remember it being quite spectacular for us back in the day, and a really nice event.
Yeah, the Meridian Hotel.
That's it.
That was the name of the venue. Well, Tessa Davidson, joining us from Oxfordshire, was a semi-finalist in that tournament. And in fact, you played, Allison, in the semis, as we'll discuss later. Great to have you along with us, Tessa. Former UK Women's Champion, of course. Same question to you then to open up. What's your first thought when someone mentions the Women's World Championship of 30 years ago?
Well, I've just got fantastic memories of it being in India, really. It was, I've always loved to travel, and to get the opportunity then to go there was just amazing. And all the, everything about it, with the staying in the hotel was fabulous. And we just had such a good time there. It was great.
Well, it really was a step into the unknown. And Allison, you had won the championship 6 times in 8 years going into that one in 94. A lot of those have been played in places like holiday camps and maybe in snooker clubs. It had moved up a bit to a fancy hotel in London, actually, around the early 90s. But this was a whole new departure. So how big a deal was it, Allison, for you and all the other players to find yourself going to India?
I think for all of us it was very big, and like you said, the birthplace of snooker, which was kind of cool. But that trip was a very big trip that none of us had really done before, I don't think. And I remember at the end of the tournament, Tessa, myself, and I think my mum was there with us. We went to the Taj Mahal. So we visited one of the wonders of the world afterwards, and that was magnificent. So it was a really, really adventurous trip all round, I think, for everyone, and a first.
And Tessa, you and everyone else, including Allison, in fact, had to play in qualifiers to get there. And those qualifiers were played right at the start of May. The championship itself began only 2 weeks later. So great excitement to qualify, to go to India for this big adventure, but very little time then to actually arrange it.
Yeah, I can't actually remember that was only 2 weeks between qualifying and going. But I can definitely remember the qualifying in London. I think that I beat Caroline Walsh to qualify, and it was there was a lot of pressure for me, because I really wanted to go on that trip. Apart from the snooker, I really wanted to go to India. So, yeah.
It's funny you talk about that pressure, because quite a few of the established names in women's snooker, Tessa, didn't actually get through the qualifying. And I wonder whether you think maybe that might have been a big part of it, that there was such a desire to go there and everyone wanted it so badly that the pressure maybe became too much for some players.
Well, I'm sure it played a part. Absolutely. Yeah. It was, for all of us, it was a first. We hadn't been on a trip like that before, and it was it meant a lot to go, to be on it, to be a part of it, and not to to actually be one of the higher ranked players and be expected to go on it, and then not to actually qualify and just have to stay at home and watch it from back in the UK would have been I definitely didn't want to be in that position. So yeah.
Well, you got through the qualifying, and so did you, Allison. You got through quite comfortably, as you'd expect. So what do you remember, Allison, about your first impressions when you arrived, of the place and the venue and everything that you were going to experience there?
I think probably the first thing that anyone will remember about India is the heat. We weren't used to that, the heat and humidity. watching cows sort of just wander along across the road, and so it was very interesting, very different. The buildings, the culture, everything was so different, but so wonderful to see.
And I remember reading actually about it that in some respects it was clear that India hadn't had an event like this before, Allison, because a lot of local refs were being used who perhaps weren't entirely at the level they should have been. There were problems with a lot of flies going around the place and landing on the balls. But I guess these are things you've got to expect when you go to a place that's not had an event like that before.
Actually, it was. I don't remember it much of that part, but the following year actually was worse, in my opinion. We played in the Meridian Hotel, which was a 5-star hotel, so we were all kind of spoiled there, and it was really very, very nice, very upper class. And I don't remember much about the conditions being bad at all. I thought it was really good, and yeah, I'm sure we had to deal with some of the insects probably flying around, but it was all good memories from that trip. It was a great trip.
Well, it was a good trip for you, Tessa, as we'll discuss. But you had a good World Championship before, hadn't you? Because you'd been to the semi-finals a few years before that. So can you remember making the long journey to India, feeling this was a big opportunity for you and that you were maybe ready to build on the success you'd been having, including winning UK titles, and go on and actually become world champion?
Well, yes, it would have definitely been in my mind. And I was playing to quite a high level, and I'd gone up the rankings. I'm not sure, I can't remember what I was, maybe 5 then when that World Championships took place. And yes, I felt very confident. I felt, I was playing full time at that time, and so the practice, I was well prepared, and the practice gives you confidence. Yeah.
I guess, Allison, given your status in the game at the time, you were probably going there, not in an arrogant way, but just in a realistic way, feeling that only winning the championship would make it a good trip for you.
Well, not really. I mean, there's always a little, there's excitement and nerves, and there's expectations too. So I think when you're winning something for the first time, it's a different feeling to coming in and trying to win it again or defend something. So it plays a little different role in your mind. But I remember Tessa very, very well. She was one of the top players, and she was always very, very consistent and had a very cool temperament around the table. So that would never have been an easy match to play.
Well, let's come to you, Tessa, about your first match over there. And you played someone who would go on to win the World Championship on 5 occasions and is now a very good pool player, Kelly Fisher. She was only 15 years of age at the time, but she'd beaten the former champion, Anne-Marie Farron, to qualify. And she really put it up to you in the quarterfinal. You must have been very pleased to come through that one, given the start she made.
Yeah, she, I mean, you could see the talents right from, before then, when she started playing, as a girl. Very talented, very natural, and she'd pot anything from anywhere. So a little bit unknown at that time, and she was improving, really quickly, rapidly. So I would have been delighted to have beaten her back then, especially having travelled all that way, and to have my first match against Kelly would have still been, that would have been a difficult match, definitely.
It's amazing to think we've had 3 Fishers who've all been at the top of the women's game and all completely unrelated to each other. And Allison, do you have any memories of Kelly at that time? Did you look at her and think, this is the player who could come along and eventually replicate the sort of success that you had been having in the years prior to that?
I think Kelly and I had only played once actually prior to me leaving. But I'd been around Kelly a lot because she used to stay at Caroline's house in London, which is a very good friend of ours. And we both used to stay there. And so I got to see her probably more like that, and obviously away from the table. And we're very good friends now. And yeah, definitely a very talented player. And she learns quickly too. If she's not good at something, she'll be working on it. And, to this day, it's the same thing. But But yeah, I remember her being very like a nice person. She's 10 years difference to me, so I left for America in '95, and so we didn't cross paths very much before I left because I was 27 when I came to America.
So Tessa, you came from 3-1 down to win that match against Kelly Fisher by 5 frames to 4.
Right.
You got to the semi-finals, and Allison, you had coasted through the qualifying, and you then played your first match over there against Sarah Smith. And
Oh yeah.
I believe actually that, and this is always a story you get when snooker players go to that part of the world, that she actually got dressed, came down to play the match, and then realised she'd got the time wrong, and it was actually the middle of the night. You always get stories like that when your snooker tournaments played in that part of the world.
That's funny.
But then she probably wished when she went back to bed, presumably, that she'd stayed there because you played so well against her and beat her by 5 frames to 0. And I think at that time you were just so dominant in the women's game. You didn't win every tournament, but you won so many of them playing so well that a lot of people just looked at you in matches and thought, well, there's absolutely no way Allison can lose this. But you, I assume, would have taken a very different approach and treated every opponent, no matter how much of a favourite you were, as someone who could beat you.
I think from learning in matches in the past, when sometimes you're trying to be more relaxed and maybe not take things as seriously. I'd lost matches like that, and that's kind of painful when that happens. So I was just very respectful of every opponent, of every shot, and to me it was always like a ball by ball situation, and staying in the present. And I knew Sarah could be a threat. I remember Sarah back in the day; she could play and certainly turn up in some of the events. But I just think I was a little more consistent, maybe. But yeah, it's always a relief, I think, just playing your first match somewhere, getting that out of the way. And if it goes well, then that sort of stands you in good stead for the rest of the tournament.
Well, it went very well for you. You finished off with a century. And Tessa, I wonder how the other players at that time, including yourself, saw Allison, because my memory of it is other dominant sports people at the time, like Martina Navratilova and Steffi Graf, people like that, you'd see them in the big tennis events, and you would just assume they'd get through the first few rounds because they were up against people who had no chance of beating them, really, and they'd always be there at the later stages of tournaments. Did the other women snooker players at that time see Allison in that sort of light as someone who had just had this massive aura and reputation about her?
Yes. She did.
This is the first I've heard.
So how did you deal with that then, when you've got to play the reputation
Alison was
as much
the
as
one,
anything?
There's no two ways about it. Allison was the one to beat, and she did have an aura, but around her, that I think some players would have found that quite difficult, with the fact that she won so much, anyway. But I always enjoyed, personally, I always enjoyed playing Allison because I felt, it probably raised my game. And I always felt very focused, and, that I knew that I had to, if I play, I knew I had to play really high level to beat her. And I think, a couple of times I might have beaten her. I don't know, was it twice or something? But, yeah, it was always Allison was always the one to beat in a tournament.
So when we got to the semi-finals, then Stacey Hilliard beat Karen Corr 6-3. Both players who had won the title before, so Stacey Hilliard was in the final. And you two played each other in the other semi-final. And Allison again played really well, Tessa. But you did fantastically well yourself to make as much of a contest of it as you did, and really hang in there and give her a tough battle.
What was do you know what the score was?
It was 6-3 in the end.
Right. It was long matches, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, nice. That's great.
Yes. It was a good. I can remember being feeling in with the chance earlier on, I'm sure, and then it obviously slipped away.
You were 4-1 down actually, and really trying to turn around a match against Allison at that time, 1-6 from 4-1 down. You know, it was a big ask, but you got it back to 4-3, and even in the last couple of frames, they were close.
Yeah, I remember it being a good match, definitely. and I always enjoyed playing. I always enjoyed, playing Allison, because it was, like I said, it was always high standard all the way around. The safety was always really good. We always I enjoyed making breaks, and she always would make breaks, and it was just a really good standard of snooker when we played.
And when it was over for you, Tessa, what was the overwhelming feeling? Was it a case of, oh, so disappointed, my dream didn't come true? Or did you look at it and say, well, what an adventure I've had here?
I was gutted.
Yeah. Well, that's the right way to be, isn't it?
Yeah. And but I obviously enjoyed being in India, and wanted to see as much of the culture. And we went out in Delhi quite a lot and saw, like Alison said, we went to see the Taj Mahal, and loved being there. But I was still, but the first thing was the snooker. That's, and of course I wanted to go all the way if I could have done.
Allison, you described it afterwards as one of the toughest matches you'd ever been involved in. I wonder, 30 years on, if you still remember much about it.
I don't really, but like I said, I always had a really great respect for Tessa and her game. And I'm sure we had some fantastic matches over the years. And she was probably somebody who did push me to the end, so never to be taken lightly, because she was one of those real consistent players, good all-round game. You had the Stacys when she was younger, and the Kellys might be more shot makery type players, and then but Tessa had an all-round game, and a very, like I said, a very good temperament too. Never sort of saw her get upset or ruffled. So, you couldn't read her very well.
Tessa, just to go off on a slight tangent for a moment, I know you're very involved in coaching now. The thing I would always say from my memories of watching Allison play is that technically she was extremely sound. Would that be your assessment of her as well?
Yes, yeah, classic, technically very classic, and always struck the ball, really struck the centre of the whites, and that's why she was so consistent, and also had a very good knowledge of the table, and would play, a very good safety game, and took the right shots, which is, not actually that, it's not that common to play people that are all rounds, play the right shots, and have got that kind of knowledge of the game. And you're very aware of it when you come up against an opponent that's got that kind of knowledge. So all round, very, very tough player to play, really.
Yeah, and as a result of all that, you were in the final once again, Allison. And I think of other serial winners in snooker from a similar sort of era, people like Steve Davis and Stephen Hendry. It really was for them all about winning the very biggest events, peaking for the World Championship every year. Did you look on things in your own career in the same way, that was what defined the year, was whether or not you could win the World Championship to a certain extent?
I think it's always the biggest thing, isn't it, on the calendar, the World Championships. To be a world champion is, you're the best in the world at that given moment. And so it's always the biggest thing to win. You can win loads of tournaments through a year, but that's the pièce de résistance, that's the big one.
And then in the final, you played Stacey Hilliard and beat her by 7-3. So you were champion once again. And you said after that you felt the difference was experience, that you were more accustomed to the bigger occasion. And the fact that you had all those titles in the past was what really stood to you and got you over the line again.
Definitely. I think if you've, winning events is another thing in itself. You can have a lot of players who frequently make quarters, semis, and that's it, they fall off. Occasionally they may win an event, and then you get sort of consistent winners. So I think learning how to win is one thing, and then being consistent at it is another thing. And I was very lucky. I was coached by Frank Callan early on in my career, and I was about 16 onwards. And I worked very hard at it. And then my parents taught to me the right way. They would be very clever in the way they inspired me. They would threaten me, really. They'd say, you could do this or you could do that. You know, it's up to you. You have the choice.
Yeah.
And but it was, you know, I had very good parental support, would drive me to tournaments and keep me competing. And, you know, the more competitive play you have, the easier it becomes sometimes. So, you know, I've got a lot of people to be thankful for and that part of it. But the experience of being there is making the right decisions at the right time, like Tessa said, having an all-round perspective of the game. I loved it. I just loved it. I love pool and snooker. I love cue sports. They're wonderful sports in themselves.
Stacey Hilliard during that championship actually made a break of 108, which at the time was the highest break that had ever been made in the Women's World Championship. So Tessa, you've given us your assessment of Allison Fisher, the player. Tell us about Stacey Hilliard and how good a player she was.
When she first came on the circuits, she was quite a quick player, and she would, you know, pot anything on the table virtually. And then over the years, I think she became, well, to win, you've got to have an all-round game. So I think she developed that side of it and became, you know, a very good safety player as well. And she was up there with the top. She was a top player, very talented, and very difficult to beat.
Didn't she become a policewoman after she stopped playing? I think
she did. She did, and now she's a chartered accountant, I think, last time I talked to her.
Okay, so a varied life for Stacey Hilliard.
Mm-hmm.
So, Allison, it turned out to be the last time that you won it. And in fact, the following year in India was the last time you ever played in it. You were beaten in the semi-finals by Kim Shaw, who I think knocked you out as well, Tessa, in '95. So why was that, Allison? Why was it that you called time on snooker?
Well, it was a funny thing, really. My motivation had gone because that particular year we had prepared so we'd qualified, 8 players had qualified to go to India again. And then Matchroom at the time, we were hosting the event, delayed it. The summer went by. You know, like you were saying earlier about that particular tournament in '94, 2 weeks later we played. So we were in the mood, you know, the World Championships. We were ready and prepared. Well, this particular year, it got delayed for about 3 or 4 months. And I'd kind of lost the enthusiasm. And I couldn't see my future, like the next 5 years of doing the same old. So I turned around to my mum in the semi-finals in India, my mum who was sitting in the audience, and I said, this is the last time you'll see me play snooker. And that was it. And I think what disappointed me too was when we got there, we were in a completely different situation. We went to the venue, it was a concrete room, there was no air conditioning, it was 120 degrees, there was no preparation, it wasn't like the nice hotel we'd been in the year before. And it was just really disappointing to treat a World Championships like that. We'd come all the way and it was just a shambles.
Did you feel let down by the game overall?
Very much so. I felt like we were all put on the back burner in that particular event. Very disappointed.
So that was the end of the championship being played in India. Tessa, you, as I say, were there again the following year. How would you sum up your overall experience from those 2 visits?
Yes, I mean, it was the second time was, I mean, I can remember going the second time to play in this, like Allison said, it was a concrete building out in the middle of, it seemed like it was in the middle of a field somewhere almost. And it wasn't on the same level of the first year that we'd experienced. The first year, the tables were in a big hotel, or the table with air conditioning, and you know, you couldn't fault the setup really at that time. It was the next year was very disappointing for us. I can't even remember I can't really remember playing it the second year. I think because it was so disappointing. I kind of
we've blocked it out. We've blocked it out.
But Allison, if it had just been a one-off, maybe it would have been different. But I got the sense from comments you made at the time that you just felt overall women's snooker wasn't going and progressing
Yeah.
the way you wanted it to. And it was more an overall feeling that this was the last straw for you.
Yeah, I think I wasn't motivated anymore. I think I'd been doing it 10 years at that point, because I became pro, like I was 17 when I started playing full time to 27, and I didn't see any improvements along the way. There was the occasional event like the World Masters that Matchroom put on with doubles and singles, and that was really nice. There was the World Championships, obviously, at the Trust House 40. There was the World Championships in India the first year. But other than that, a few mixed doubles events. But other than that, it wasn't really the regular events. Prize money wasn't going anywhere. So it was hard to keep paying bills. That was my full-time thing at the time. And it just wasn't really, I couldn't see, like I said, I couldn't see the future of it. And I just decided to make a jump.
Well, I know you're drinking English tea there at the moment, and your accent hasn't changed a bit. As you talked about, you were very close to your parents, and you were still quite young, really, when you think about it. So do you feel it was quite a brave move for you to just leave all that behind and start from scratch in America?
Well, it was, because I got on a plane with a suitcase and a cue, and that was it, really. And I thought, what am I doing? What? It suddenly dawned on me. But I thought, well, you can always go back. You can't always go forward in life with opportunity. And the first event I played in really cemented that I'd made the right decision, because I just felt immediately at home, welcomed, and it felt professional, which is, I think, what I was looking for. And yeah, I mean, it was very brave, I think, in some ways. But I think over that course of that last few months in England, or that year, I had convinced myself it's the right thing to do.
We were talking earlier, Tessa, about overused terms, and I think another one is trailblazer. But it was definitely true for Allison, because after that, Karen Corr went over, Julie Kelly went over as well, and of course Kelly Fisher with so much success. So when you saw all that, Tessa, were you in any way tempted to have a go at the American pool scene yourself, with all the opportunity there was for women over there at the time?
No, not at that time. I think I was similar, that I became disenchanted with snooker, and I'd been playing full time for getting on for 10 years and put a lot of effort into it, and at times we had some fabulous times and some good tournaments, but then there was a lot of quite poor prize money and tournaments where we weren't really getting anything back, and it was expensive to keep playing. Really, I wasn't really earning much money out of it, and I think I just had enough, because you to play seriously, you've got to practice. I was practicing most days 6 hours a day. You've just got to put in the practice, and for me it was all or nothing, and I didn't. And at that point, I started my family when I was 30. I wasn't going to go to America. It wouldn't have suited me at that time. So I just wanted to stop it, and I had a completely different life for the next 20 years, and enjoyed that. And now coming back to it now, after my family's grown up and my children have grown up, and it's brilliant to come back to something with so much opportunity to travel and meet different people.
You're doing really well since you returned. And I was going to ask you something that you've pretty much answered there. I was going to ask why it was that after so long out of the game, over 20 years, you decided to come back to it. And is it as simple as that you just have the opportunity now that your family's grown up?
Well, yes. I mean, it's felt right at this stage in my life. And, to then refocus and have a that much of a focus to become good to sport again, and actually start to win and beat good players, is a brilliant feeling. My nature's quite competitive, and I love the game is in my blood. I love it. I love the people around it, and I love going to the clubs, and it's just ignited all of that again in me. And it's just, I feel very lucky in my 50s to be able to go back to that. And here I am now, having just travel to China to play, you know, in another World Championships again. And, you know, with all of that that's gone along with this, it's just, you know, been a fantastic sort of experience and treat now to do.
Alison, this 1990s era that we're talking about, there was a lot of attention actually on women's snooker around that time because the game had exploded, particularly in Britain over the previous 15 years. And there was a lot of conversation about what could be done to maybe replicate that success in the women's game. And there was a lot of optimism. As you say, there was some progress made. But what do you feel could have been done differently, Alison, that might have seen the women's game deliver on all that promise there seemed to be at the start of the 90s?
Well, it's hard to say, really. I mean, from my point of view, I got very lucky in that I was very involved with Matchroom's Pro League when they did the Matchroom League going around the country. I used to play the top amateur player at every event before the pros would come on. That was a fantastic experience and great exposure, and to get out in front of large audiences. So that was a really good experience for me. And then the following year, I ended up playing in the Matchroom League. And that was a really big deal because I got to play with Hendry, White, Davis, Mio, Folds, Hallett. And that was a fantastic opportunity. So things like that came along. Maybe more of that type of thing where, you know, a couple of the ladies could be taken and do more of those types of events. Or I was actually one point away from qualifying to actually be a pro on equal terms with the guys at in you know, the qualifications. So I nearly made it, actually just qualifying. But not many of the other women had those opportunities. So, you know, more events, more money. I think the money was a big deal, wasn't it, Tessa? Because to win like 250 or 500 pounds for a big tournament and not very frequent tournaments, was not going to pay your bills at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I feel very lucky that I've had the come back into it. I never really left, but obviously to go into a different cue sport. But what are the answers? I don't know. I don't know what the answers would have been. I like what they're doing now, where they're giving some of the ladies opportunities on the pro tour. I would have lapped that up back in the day if that was me, like now. I'd have loved to have had that opportunity where they get the 2-year card. I think some of the thing is we didn't have the numbers playing. We didn't have the numbers in the sport like the men had. It wasn't, and back in my era and your era, Tessa, it probably wasn't the done thing. It wasn't always welcomed in clubs. I remember when I was a kid, there were some clubs that I couldn't go in as a female. So I think the era was different. It wasn't always welcoming, and it wasn't always easy being a woman going into snooker clubs. So there was that factor. You're always trying to knock down doors and, you know, do well. But we did have a great tour with great people on it, and I really did enjoy that. So I completely understand that. And I have that in pool where the camaraderie of the players, you've stepped back into it now and you feel like this is like home again. You know, once you're a competitor, you're always a competitor, but there's the other side of it where you're like one big family too.
But you mentioned there, sorry, Alison, I was just going to pick up on something you said there about how you played in the Premier League. Now, playing against some of the top players in the world, what you didn't say was that you actually beat quite a few of them. You beat Mike Hallett, who was one of the best in the world at the time, Tony Drago, and Neil Folds, who at one point was 3 in the world. So someone might look at that and say, well, if she could beat those players, why was it that when she played in the ranking tournament circuit, she wasn't getting through to the later stages? And I remember discussing this with you a few years ago, and you felt that it was a case that the qualifying system didn't really suit you, and that if you'd been able to get through those, well, clearly you were going to be comfortable playing in the main arenas, and that was the thing. You just couldn't get into the big events, and if you'd managed to win more qualifying matches, things could have been very different.
I found going to Norbreck Castle, for example, very intimidating because you couldn't get on the practice tables. You get all the guys sort of hogging the practice tables, you know, whether it be doubles or fours or whatever. So there was no scheduled practices, you know, to prepare for your matches. And then you were playing in 4 small walls with nobody watching. So there was no atmosphere there. And by that time, I kind of got used to being with an audience in an arena. And I think that would have suited me better. So you know, there's those factors. I think it's just a little bit of intimidation too. Really, there was only myself, I think, and Stacey even attempting to do that at that point at the Norbreck Castle. Maybe some of the other girls at the other events when we did pontins.
I went in it.
To Norbreck, did you?
Yeah, 92, I think it was.
And what, you're the class of 92, and what did you think of it?
Yeah, I was, well, the same. I can remember these cubicles where we played.
Yeah.
And yeah, it didn't have, and it was very, and again, it felt, well, it was all the blokes there, and you know, not many of us were there. But,
yeah, 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah, I think Stacey went in it, didn't she? I'm sure
she did. Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Stacey Hillard, she actually played Alex Higgins she actually played Alex Higgins. She had got through to the last 128 of one of the ranking events and played Alex in one of the first matches, actually, after his return from being out for a year. So she did well and got some good results.
Yeah, it was just, I'll tell you what was hard about that too. You spent the summer in Blackpool. If you lost your first event, you had to wait a week for the next event, then the next event, another week, you know. So it was all about getting on a roll. If you have a few good events, you can maintain it. But if you get knocked out, you're sort of stumbling around, really. So the flow of it was not very good, I don't think.
What do you think you could have reached, Allison, if you'd managed to achieve your potential in terms of what a good player you were and your ability on the ranking tournament circuit? Do you feel you could have been a top 32 player, top 64 maybe, or higher?
I have no idea. It's something that's the unknown. It's just quite difficult, I think. You know, if you're alone out there representing sort of the female population, I think it can be very difficult. I don't know if I could have made a top 64 to top 32. I have no idea, but that lifestyle is very tough too. You know, you have to be cut out for it.
And we're talking here about the 94 World Championship, Tessa. It was played in India. It was a big deal for it to go to Asia. What we've seen in recent years, as you alluded to earlier, is that actually most of the recent Women's World Championships have been played in that part of the world. And as you have seen, that's where most of the new talent is coming from. So do you see that being the future of the women's game, that it is going to be dominated by Asians?
Well, there's a lot of Asians play, yeah, a lot of girls from China, Hong Kong, India, but also the UK has still got strong players as well. But I think to me, it's on a global scale now, and that's got to be good for women's snooker. And playing in China is obviously you know, showcasing it over there in that part of the world. And also they also put on a great tournament. You know, you couldn't fault it. You know, we've got top level conditions. We've got VIP cars. We've got, you know, brand new tables, brand new cloths, and you couldn't fault the level of the competition there. So that's going to put it back. That's going to put it onto a higher level. That's more like you'd see on the main tour, which is good for the standard.
I know, Allison, you never regretted going to America because obviously it's gone so well for you over there in every respect. But not long after you left, the Women's World Championship started actually being played at the Crucible. And when you heard that, was there part of you thinking, oh, I wish I'd just stayed another year or two, I could have played there?
Yeah, I do miss the fact that I didn't play at the Crucible. That definitely, there's no doubt about that. Because I did go there to watch the World Championship maybe a year or two before that. And that's a hell of an environment to play. And I would love to have played at the Crucible.
Yeah, it was very much Kelly's era. She dominated it in that time. But of course, Tessa, you're going to be playing at the Crucible in a couple of weeks.
I know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's the Mecca, isn't it, for snooker players, and it's an absolute honour to be asked to play there, and you know it will just be a dream.
So it's the World Seniors Championship, and you have been invited as the Women's World Seniors Champion.
Yes.
And the thing about it is, it's not just like qualifying for the World Championship. You get to play at the Crucible. That's the 2-table setup when you make your debut. this is going to be the single table situation at the Crucible that you're going to be playing in. It's of dreams.
Yeah, it will be amazing. I just hope that I can, you know, hit the white ball.
Oh, you'll be fine. You'll be fine out there. It'll be amazing.
Yeah, it will be amazing. Yeah, I'm really looking for. I can't wait. I'm very excited to play there, and you know, it will be totally amazing. Yeah.
And I don't know how you find time to be back playing and practicing, Tessa, because you've got so much else going on, haven't you? You've got coaching, and you've got a whole other career outside of snooker as well.
Yeah. I mean, my main focus for the snooker at the moment is, you know, I became a coach last year, a level 2 coach, but my main focus is with competition. You know, even though I'm interested in that side of it, but I've had to, you know, put that on the back burner a little bit for the moment. And then I'm a self-employed gardener as well, so. I go and do my sort of proper job, and then I'll go and practice after that in the sort of early evenings. And yeah, it's quite tough. It's quite full on.
So sorry, I have to say this: from potting balls to potting plants, basically, that's all your life is at.
Can you pot a geranium? That's what I want to know.
Do I what?
Can you pot a geranium? Do you remember that old expression?
No, I don't actually. I hadn't heard that one.
Oh, you remember the people who say, "Oh, she can't pot a geranium"? It's a
I
southern
can.
one, Tessa.
Wow. Hopefully.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
I think I might just start,
yeah.
I might start using that in commentary someday soon. Now that you've mentioned it, Alison.
Yeah, there you go. Can't pot a geranium.
So thank you for that one. And what about you, Alison? Life nowadays, you're loving it over in America and still playing to a pretty high level in the pool as well.
I am. Yeah, I won a tournament in January, which was I was, you know, my goal was to win a tournament last year, and it didn't happen. I was second in the world 9-ball and third in the world 10-ball championships, which amazed me because I wasn't expecting that. So I've still got it there. I'm still playing, but my kids are 14 and 13 years old. So I'm trying to balance family life out with still competing. So I'm really in that nice era, I think, of enjoying it more, enjoying the process. So when I do compete, it's not like full-time like some of the players, but I'm still playing as many events as I can and, you know, raising a family. So it's been wonderful.
And being in the US, Alison, do you ever get to play snooker at all now, even for a bit of fun?
No, not at all. But I think Emporium that sponsors me is thinking of putting a snooker table in. So you never know, Tessa, I might come back and be a senior and try and play on tour.
That'd be brilliant.
I would love to actually come see you all one day.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to.
Maybe when I'm 70.
Listen, never mind playing in the seniors, Alison. As I've said to your namesake and friend Kelly Fisher many times, I reckon you players were so good that if you tried to get back on and play in the regular women's tournaments now, you'd still be very competitive, even though, as we've said, the standards are really good at the moment and a lot of
yeah, I just want to say I'm pleased to see that with the, you know, Hong Kong, Thailand, China being involved. It's taken it, like Tessa said, to a whole new level, and that's what it needs, the female side of snooker.
Okay, it's going to be fascinating to see how it all develops. It's been such a pleasure, as I knew it would be, talking to the two of you. Allison Fisher, all the way over in North Carolina, and Tessa Davidson in Oxfordshire. Thanks so much for joining me on the WPBSA official podcast, and I'll see you for another installment soon. Bye-bye.